Tim Steele.
Bill Evans.
Eric Croft.
Big Train.
Alvin Gray Jackson.
Patrick Flynn.
Eric Musher.
Dean Bates, Assistant Principal Training.
Good, thank you, sir. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Let's see, roll call, we've done that, approval of agenda.
Hey, Dick, I'm on the phone.
I'm sorry, yes, Amy and Forrest.
Yeah, I'm on the phone as well.
Yeah, they have a sign there with both your names on there.
You look taller in person.
Thanks for joining with us. The agenda is only one item on here, and that's the taxi ordinance, so we don't need to go there. There is no business. New business, proposed taxi ordinance. Mr. Evans, sir.
Sure.
Turn the time over to you.
Thank you.
When you're done, we'll have questions, I'm sure.
I am sure. What I'll do is I'll just kind of go over the broad picture of what I guess it's 124 ordinance is, sort of the main points, and then if you have more specific questions, be glad to answer them. First of all, I think it's important to understand, despite what you read in the daily news, this is not a measure to deregulate the taxi industry. The taxi industry is, as you know, through Title 11, is fairly highly regulated at a number of different levels. This just deals with one of those levels in a substantial way, but it leaves in place all the existing safety regulations, for drivers, background checks, all those things, cameras, all the safety regulations for vehicles, inspections, mileage, all of those type of regulations are not touched by this ordinance. This ordinance just deals with one aspect of our regulations, and that is the municipal's control over the supply and demand of the number of taxis that are allowed to participate in the market. For background, I think probably most of you know, maybe some of the newer members, I like to say that now, may not be as familiar, but historically we have a transportation commission that is mandated to hold what are called convenience and necessity hearings periodically, and the purpose of the convenience and necessity hearings is to gather information regarding the market, the needs of the market, the demand, and how the industry is running in order to determine if there is a need for adding more permits to the system. And the transportation inspector, Mr. Musser, in conjunction with the commission, goes through that analysis, and then if they determine that there is a need for more permits can be issued. It's important to realize that there are two types of permits currently out there. There are the transferable permits that allow permit holders to sell their interest to another person, and non-transferable permits that basically are just permits to operate and can't be sold. So there's no secondary market for non-transferable permits. We stopped issuing transferable permits back in 1994. Currently, there are 158 transferable permits in the market and 30 non-transferable permits. So that means since 1994, we have issued 30 new permits in the last 22 years. So there are a total of 188 permits out there operating, 158 are transferable, 30 are non-transferable. From what I understand, the most recent analysis by the Transportation Inspector and Commission on the convenience and necessity hearing would have resulted in a recommendation from the Transportation Inspector of issuing in 2016, this current year, somewhere between 47 and 56 new permits based on their analysis. And I'll get to some of the details about my ordinance after that, but just so you know, that's what the estimate of demand is currently in 2016. It's also important with that history in mind to keep in mind that we've also had a corresponding history of having chronically underserved groups within the municipality. we're all pretty familiar that it's been difficult, and we've had, a lot of attention to Eagle River. It's difficult to have taxi service. Girdwood, it's difficult to have taxi service, both for the same reason. They're geographically distant and sort of less economical to serve with taxis. We've also had a chronic problem with bar break hours and having sufficient taxis downtown operating to cover that ebb and flow. And we've also had consistent complaints about the ability to serve the disabled community with taxis. So those four things have happened consistently. We've had several measures over the last several years to try to address those, sometimes piecemeal, sometimes in broad strokes, but nothing has happened yet. The new ordinance was 2016-124, changes the supply and demand procedure by moving eventually to a system whereby taxi permits are issued in the same manner as business permits. That basically the city is not going to necessarily control the number of taxis that are out there, going to let the market dictate how much, how many taxis can be supported by the demand for taxi use. The ordinance does that in a phased-in approach over a 5-year period, whereby we establish a certain number of added permits each of those 5 years, and then after the 5th year, it's sort of an open market where anybody who is qualified can obtain a permit if they have the money to do so. It's important to note that during that 5-year period, the number of permits we are issuing increases slowly during the 5 years. The first year, which would be 2017, and may have to be adjusted because we're not going to be even dealing with this until December. But the first year, it's anticipated or calls for 20 new permits, 15 regular permits, and 15 wheelchair accessibility permits, which should be noted is actually far less than the number that the convenience and necessity recommendation would have said for this year adding, which was again that 47 to 56 new permits. It does that for the 5 years, and it's important to note that the price for the permits during this 5-year period is set. It's not based on an auction where it goes to the highest bidder. It's set on a lottery basis during the 5-year period, and it's set at $1,980, which is the current price for a renewal permit. Current taxi cabs have to renew their permits every year, and the current price for that is $1,980. So new permits would be issued at that same price. And it would be done by the transportation inspector, notice people who are interested, put in their applications, and if there are more applications than there are permits to be issued that year, the lucky winners would be selected by lottery. After the 5-year period is up, again, people who are interested in a permit would just go to the transportation inspector, have their money, establish that they are qualified by the requirements and the regulations to be a permit holder, and would then be issued a permit. In addition to that, we've kept the role of the Transportation Commission in there, but we've kind of turned it upside down from what it currently is. Like I said previously, currently the Transportation Commission does the convenience and necessity hearing, evaluates whether there is a basis for adding permits to the system, and if there is, they do so. What this ordinance proposes is that after we get to that open market in the 5th year where people can just apply for permits, the role of the Transportation Commission is to similarly evaluate the industry using the same techniques, same approach, same criteria, but their role is to basically stop the issuance of permits if they determine, based on the evidence, by a clear and convincing evidence, that continued issuance of permits would be harmful to the public interest in the taxi industry. So it's just the reverse of what they do now. They would be sort of a brake on the system instead of allowing the system to issue more permits. It's also, another feature of the ordinance is with respect to the transferable permits. Currently, the transferable permits, they do not have to be an owner-operator. People can own transferable permits and not even live in Anchorage or not be involved in the industry other than owning the permit and either, leasing the right to operate under that permit to another party. With the non-transferable permits, they're required to be basically owner-operators. And the system we're proposing continues that, and, all future permits, they would have to be owner-operators. But because of the change, we've grandfathered in the current transferable permit holders. They can get something which is, I forget what we call it, a certificate of ownership that allows them to continue to be non-owner operators. They don't have to all of a sudden drop everything and start operating their own cabs. They can continue to be distant owner operators. But that aspect, that certificate of ownership, is non-transferable. So that if a current owner of a transferable permit wants to sell their permit to someone else, that person would have to be an owner-operator. The goal of the system being, at some point, we want to encourage the taxi industry to be mostly owner-operators. The idea behind this is that the industry itself, the taxi industry, should be a type of business that people can get into with limited financial barriers. If somebody is an entrepreneur, wants to work for themselves, wants to get in the taxi business, thinks they can make money in it, they shouldn't be foreclosed by having to get $100,000 or whatever the price of a taxi permit is going to be. They should be able to get in at a limited cost, buy their taxi, buy their vehicle, do all the other things with insurance, and take their chances at competing in the industry. Now, we're going to get, obviously a lot of complaints about this ordinance from people in the industry. I think there are two main groups that will have valid concerns about it. The first being the drivers of the taxi cabs, whether they're owner-operators or whether they're just working for someone else. And the chief complaint, I think, from that group will be simply that it's going to dilute the amount of business that they are trying to get in the area. That there's so much demand for taxi cabs. If we add lots more permits, lots more drivers on the road, there's not going to be enough work to go around. And I think that to some degree is a valid concern. I think that is exactly true, that there is a limited amount of work, and that as we add permits, it's going to function like other markets, and some people will do well and some people won't, and the market will only support those that ultimately do well. I think it's important to understand too that once we add permits to the market and make taxi cab use more accessible, more omnipresent in the city, we also may increase demand. I mean, I think there is some level of pent-up demand that if taxis were more available, more people would use them. We also have to consider that we have those areas of town that aren't being served, Eagle River, Bar Break, and other areas where we know there is a demand, and yet the market is not supplying the cabs for it. So I think there's unmet demand, and I think as we add supply, at some point that will have to balance out. Where that is, I don't think the municipality or even the transportation inspector through the convenience and necessity hearing is able to accurately determine that. They're not experts in economics and the taxi industry in that sense. I think the market is the best judge for how many taxi cabs City of Anchorage can maintain. The other group that I think will be certainly opposed to this would be those who own transferable permits now. Currently, there is not only the value in having a transferable permit that allows you to operate a taxi cab and make money through the industry. There's also, because they are transferable, a secondary market for being able to sell those permits when you want to. So they have some value. Under this system, once the city starts issuing permits at a fixed value, whether through the 5-year phase-in or at the end of that when they're readily available. Obviously, the secondary market for transferable permits will be devalued, unquestionably. Nobody's going to pay somebody $50,000 for their taxi permit when they can get a permit themselves for $1,980 at the city desk. To that end, though, I mean, I think we have tried over the last several years. There was an attempt, I think it was 2013, before I was on the body, to do something very similar to this, change the supply of taxi permits. In 1994, we stopped issuing the transferable permits. I think there have been certainly indications to the industry that there was a possibility that at some point the municipality would change its regulations in this regard. And people may continue to invest in that in hopes that we never do it. But I think, to some extent they bear the risk of that if that's how they choose to invest. And finally, the last point I'll make is that once this was introduced, there was a lot of comments about TNCs and Lyft, and people just want Uber instead and don't even want to bother with taxis. This ordinance has nothing to do with TNCs, not directly, certainly. This ordinance has just to do with taxi cabs, but I think it is important to keep in mind that I believe that we're going to have TNCs, Lyft, Sidecar, Juno, there's a number of them now, not only Uber, operating in Anchorage and in Alaska in not the very distant future.
If we change state law.
If we change state law, which I think will happen. And I think it's important that at that time, once that happens and we develop a regulatory scheme for those type of products as well, that we also have a very competitive and somewhat nimble taxi industry. So I think the end game, the end goal of this is to have within several years time period both a very high functioning taxi industry that meets supply and demand, as well as the options for having TNCs for those that prefer that method. With that, yield and take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I want to go to the ones that aren't here first. Forrest, you first, sir. Question?
Oh, was I in the queue?
You're in the queue.
Oh, well, I didn't ask to be in the queue, but I'm happy to do it.
Go ahead.
So, I guess what I wanted to ask, one question to Bill, or Assemblyman Evans, rather, is the lease price between the drivers and the medallion holders, is that capped or set by regulation?
The price between the medallion holders and the drivers?
So my understanding is that most drivers lease for a day the medallion from the medallion owners. Is that correct?
Through the chair,
Go
they
ahead.
lease it by shift, a 12-hour shift.
Did you hear that, Forrest? By a 12-hour shift.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so I'll direct these questions to Eric then, if you don't mind. Mr. Muser, is that price, that lease price, is that set or any way regulated by our title?
Through the chair, no, it's not. There's no cap on the lease rates.
And there's no minimum either?
Through the chair, no.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting aspect of this. Some drivers are concerned this will dilute the market, but it should also, in theory, reduce their lease, the lease they have to pay to the medallion holders. Would you say that's the case, Mr. Muser?
I couldn't answer that. That's kind of a market-driven, untested.
Can you hear him, Forrest?
Yeah, I mean, is there anybody in the room that's willing to speculate on that? I mean, it seems like there are a bunch more medallions that, tax drivers would be able to go to the medallion holder that offered them the lowest lease price. Is that not the case?
Forrest, I'm going to go to the audience towards the end of the meeting. I'm sure that's a topic to be brought up. I just want to
Okay.
get through some members' questions now.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
So I have one other question for Bill then, for Mr. Assemblyman Evans. I say I have two, but I think one we can wait till the end. But the second one, so Bill, you said that if the current owner of a transferable permit sells the permit, it becomes owner-operator. What if it's inherited or in some other way transferred? The same rules?
It's a good question. I don't know. The ordinance doesn't talk about inheritance, if that's a transfer. I think that's something that, if it is inherited from the same family, that it should, the certificate of ownership should go along with that. I would, if it doesn't now, we should amend it to make that the case.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear your answer there, Bill. Were you saying you did sort of agree that if it was inherited, that they could keep the non-owner operator status?
I think I can't say for sure how this would actually work under the ordinance, as I didn't consider the inheritance. I don't know if that's treated differently through the commission, but I think the end goal should be that if it is inherited, it can keep the certificate of ownership, which would allow it to be a non-owner operator.
Okay, good. Thank you. Those are my questions, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
sir. Ms. Dembowski, ma'am?
I don't have any right now, thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Steele, sir?
Yeah, my question was with regards to metering. With the new permits, would we require metering on those taps? Or is it negotiated price? Is it whatever the market is there?
No, they would have the same restrictions on them that the current caps have as far as metering and those prices. It wouldn't be any different.
So anyone who buys it is going to have to outfit it with a meter.
Yeah, for
Set it up prices.
all the vehicle requirements for a taxi cab and all the other operational requirements remain the same as it is currently.
Yeah, I'd hate to see a fist fight break out or bar break over somebody trying to negotiate prices between a couple of folks and to Eagle River or wherever. And that's good thing.
Mr. Cross, sir?
To whoever can tell me what the original purpose of the prohibition on Medicaid vouchers was. Did you find out, Mr. Evans, or?
I can't say I found out the original purpose. I mean, the vehicle, there's a vehicle for hire, which is a different entity than taxi cabs. There's a lot of the vans that go around for different purposes that are regulated differently than taxi cabs. And at least as far as my recollection goes back, they were always restricted in being able to take the Medicaid vouchers directly. I don't know if there was a specific purpose or why they were. I think it protects the taxi industry because they would be the only ones allowed to do that. And the reason for the change here is to open that up a little more so that the vehicle for hires as well as the taxi cabs can take the vouchers so that people with those medical conditions necessitating transportation have more available options. But I don't know the history of when that restriction was placed, and maybe Mr. Musser does.
Mr. Musser, can you answer that question?
Yes, sir. That provision was amended into Title 11 in 2013 by request of the state of Alaska. The voucher program was created for the taxi industry, but way back when it was started. And what was happening as Anchorage grew with all the assisted living homes and non-emergency providers, the voucher industry was just ballooning out of control. And so the state came to us when we were considering members at that time and asked to stop it. That they wanted to use the really care coordinated process that was in place to provide for payment for the vehicle for hire side of our Title 11 regulations. And so we did incorporate that in 2013, but it's had a negative impact on the disability community because they're being left at Liberty Dialysis, Providence and other industries, and they're not able to get a cab. And so it's by removing that prohibition on those that we regulate, it assists us in that disability area, providing transportation.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anything else? Yes, Mr. Worthington.
I got a couple. One, so the number for each of those years,
I'm sorry?
the number that you would issue for the first 5 years, where did that come from?
Where did it come from? It was based, it started with the numbers from the transportation inspection on their immediate need, and just kind of phased that in over 5 years. There's no, I can't say the specifics for each year is scientific, but what I was looking for is like 75 in the first 3 years or so, and I think the numbers we ended up with wheelchair accessible and the regular permits, it ended up being in that 5-year period, 160. So a little longer period.
So, and that number comes, what's that based on? Just typical city size?
On which number?
A number for, what total number of taxis do you think we might need?
Well, what the commission had started developing in 2013 under the convenience and necessity, and I'm sorry, to the chair, but to the process was first were more cabs needed in the community, to meet the demand, and they decided that, but what they were looking at was, when you look at the total number of permits today, what level of participation do we have in the community? And the data indicates that we are at about 79% participation, either owners, permit owners, or either on vacation, or the vehicles are broken down, involved in some sort of, but we're only getting 79% participation. So the commission was looking at, in order to achieve 100% participation in our existing structure, what would it take? And so the data indicates it would take somewhere between 47 and 56 permits to get us under existing ratio of 1 cab to approximately 1,600 residents, 47 to 56 additional cabs.
There's a couple other.
Go ahead.
So then the 1,980 is kind of our price for that.
It's the current price for renewing this permit.
It's an odd price. 1995, 1980.
We could make it 2017 or 2016, whatever you want to ask.
So, and then one more editing for Bill.
Go ahead now, get Mr. Flynn.
Okay, in G, page 12, G, and this is regarding the taxi with wheelchair. But I didn't quite, taxi cab, this is what you got. Taxi cabs permitted, in operation 8 a.m. to 5, minimum 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. So if someone has a wheelchair accessible taxi with a permit for that, it has to be in operation 7 days a week, or that 9-hour period. Is that realistic? That's a lot of work for that.
8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday.
So it's 9 hours, or 5, so do that. Plus 50 months or weekends.
You can work more, yeah, that was just sort of the minimum to keep. One of the problems we've had is just getting, the issue, you say, handicap accessible permits already, getting them into service has been somewhat of a challenge. So part of the restriction on that permit would be that you would have to be willing to make sure that your cab is accessible. Now, it doesn't take into account vacations, things like that, or sick days, things, but the general expectation is that you'll be in service those hours.
There's a tender problem with handicap permits, because a lot of times people want the permit, but don't want to pick it up if they're handicapped. Or they may have a dog, a service animal, they don't want to pick up a service animal. We've had numerous problems with people that have a wheelchair accessible taxi cab, so something we have to work on every time you look at this issue. Mr. Flynn, sir.
It's actually a good lead into my first question, which is in pricing the new permits, we don't differentiate between a standard permit and a wheelchair accessible permit. Was there any thought given to either a higher price for a regular permit or a lower price for a wheelchair permit, given that the vehicle cost is gonna be higher? And of course, we've added an operational requirement.
Yeah, a lot of thought was given, but the end result was I didn't come up with a difference. I think there is a certain, if you have a wheelchair accessible vehicle, you technically have access to certain business that the other cabs don't, when somebody needs that. I think it's something that may have to take place in the future in order to get, and I was thinking there would be a lower entry price for wheelchair accessible taxi cabs. I think that may have to be the next step if this does not improve service in that area. With sort of the lottery system of 15 permits and 5 handicap or wheelchair accessible permits, if we see that people are not going for the wheelchair accessible permits, I think we'll have to use other market-based incentives to get that there. So it is considered, and I think that's probably one of the things that we'll have to monitor closely.
Appreciate that. And my other question, Mr. Chairman, probably for Mr. Gates. I know when we've had discussions of this nature in the past, there has been concern that the municipality is exposing itself to liability based on the limited entry system that we have in place. Do you have any thoughts on what exposure we may or may not have based on this proposal?
That's really difficult to answer.
If you prefer to answer it offline and privately as an attorney-client privilege, I'd be happy to take that.
Sure, that would be a better way to discuss the liability issues is in an executive session, I think. I can make comments on exposure. 5-year phasing is designed to diminish that type of exposure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates, would you look at making that available to all the Sunday members? Because otherwise, we're all going to ask you the same question 11 different times. Okay?
Feel free to ask me questions if you're not.
No, the one that he asked is the one I'm going to ask, and most of us going to ask, because we've got the same question every time this comes up. What's our potential liability? So if you send it to him, I would suggest we get a copy because you're our attorney. Mr. Evans.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that without committing the law department to a position on it. Sort of the genesis for this ordinance actually started several months ago during the period of time when Uber was in town and all this shakeup was going on at that time. And Mr. Brennan, representing the taxi industry, had at that time, talked about potential lawsuits. It's always either a constitutional due process violation or a takings. So this analysis began from that standpoint, the legal analysis, looking at all the precedents and what the likelihood would be of creating a defensible ordinance. So I can tell you that there's been a lot of work between the law department and myself on that issue, and I'm at least pretty comfortable with this being defensible for what that's worth.
There's lots of attorneys, and I appreciate that opinion, sir. Any other questions? Yes. Mr. Peterson, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking on page 11, item D. It's talking about how many hours these non-transferable permits the owners are required to drive. And it says not fewer than 1,000 hours a year, or 50% of the time the taxi cab is operated during the year. From my understanding, most of these cabs are running 24/7, 365, or at least that's the goal. So if you're driving 12 hours a day, that comes out to 4,368 hours a year. So 1,000 hours a year versus 4,300, what?
Mr. Peterson, I think the section you're saying is being deleted, the bracketed area.
They're deleting that?
Yeah, it says fewer than 1,000. I think the bracket indicates it's being deleted.
So they're just going strictly with 50% of the time then?
I think so, sir.
Okay. And I've got another question about the $1,980 annual fee or fees for the permits. Is this fee, has this been adjusted? Is it connected to inflation? How long has it been $1,980? Does anyone know that?
Mr. Musser, please.
Thank you, through the chair. It was increased in 1900, it was effective January for the 2014 permit year. When the assembly was undertaking revisions at that time, the enforcement was a significant issue. And the industry wanted some increased enforcement, some additional code enforcement staff, and would have you across the entire Title 11 regulatory environment. And so, historically, we've been required to be a self-funded office, a fee-based office. And so, after an analysis, we determined that 1980 was the fee that would provide for the revision to Title 11 and fund the office and provide the code enforcement the industry was seeking.
Mr. Peterson, I was in charge of that at that time, and I'm the one that responded to the request to have additional people put in that department by increasing the fee coming in.
Okay. All right, great.
So we actually have them now, I think, don't we?
Yes, sir.
So,
Well, following up on that, so if we had, say, 100 more taxi cabs, would you need, maybe you could lower the price because you had more money coming in, or would you need more staff? What would happen?
Well, through the chair, it's entirely possible with an influx of that many more cabs on the route, there could be the potential of an increased enforcement need. As it shakes out, there may also be some equilibrium, that takes place where we could suggest, perhaps some sort of reduction in the fees. It's always through the chair issue.
All right, thank you.
other questions from assembly members? We're going to open up to public comments for a while. Be 3 minutes. If somebody will move a chair up to the front, because I'd like you to, like this one on the end, would you move it up a bit so you can speak to all of us? We can pick you up. Not that you want to talk, but I'm sure you do.
Whoever talks. How's this?
That's fine. Just identify who you are for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes. Any questions from the audience? You'll have time when it comes in front of the assembly to address it. But if you have any questions now, we're more than happy to take your comments now.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will go first then. My name is Jim Brennan. I'm an attorney for the Anchorage Tax Cap Permit Owners Association, otherwise known as ATPOA. I've been representing them for quite some time. And I'm happy to respond to questions regarding specific parts of this proposal, but I mainly want to look at the merits of the overall idea, which has been examined many times over the years by the Assembly and by the Anchorage voters. The Anchorage Assembly, on 2 prior occasions, first of all, this system that's in place now, public convenience and necessity for issuing more permits, has been in effect for over 40 years in Anchorage, since the early 70s. There have been times when the Assembly has examined open entry as a solution to various complaints, and has spent an enormous amount of time holding hearings on that. And the 2 times I can remember over the years, after all that was done, they decided not to proceed with open entry because looking at the evidence, they decided it was a bad idea. The most recent experience was when there was an initiative in Anchorage in 2007 to open entry. The issue was heavily aired in public, including discussion of the experience of other American cities which had unsuccessfully had experience with open entry and had reversed field and gone back to a public convenience and necessity system. particularly in the 80s, the open entry was experimented with and was a complete failure. So in Anchorage in 2007, the voters ended up rejecting open entry by a vote of 65 to 35%. And you have to ask yourself, what's changed since then? Well, we've had quite a few more permits issued since then. Of the 30 more permits that Mr. Evans referred to, 25 of them were issued since 2007. In other words, at a faster rate than the growth of the Anchorage population. I see the chairman indicating my time is up. I've got a lot more to say, if I can be permitted.
You got 45 seconds left.
Go ahead.
Okay. So nothing has changed. There's been no increase in the number of complaints. The only thing that has really changed during that period is, once again, it's an ideological idea, free competition. Who can object to that? That's fine until it's examined empirically, and that's why the cities that have done it have had a bad experience. The most recent being Minneapolis, which tried a phased-in open entry, such as Mr. Evans is proposing. And in that city, they are having drivers having to wait twice as long for rides, resulting in such decreased incomes that the drivers are quitting the occupation in droves. Similar experience in San Diego. So in the name of, there's competition. We all like competition. We like constructive competition. In this particular type of market, open entry has resulted in destructive competition. So again, what has changed? What has changed is the efforts of some to bring Uber to town. Wanting an
Bring
unfair...
your time's up, sir.
All right.
I think
Question, Ms. Emmy, members?
I think Mr. Dunbar has a question for.
Mr. Dunbar, do you have a question, sir?
Yes, was that Mr. Brennan? I'm sorry, I didn't catch his last name.
Mr. Brennan, he's an attorney in town.
Great. Mr. Brennan, so I think you partially answered this. You had said that since 2007, I believe, there were cities that had reversed open entry, or that in recent times cities had reversed open entry. You cited Minneapolis and San Diego. So I guess my question is, one, did Minneapolis and San Diego reverse open entry? Two, what are the cities you can point to in the last 10 years? I'd love to go back. I'd love to study those cities
Okay,
that have actually reversed open entry.
I was not identifying Minneapolis and San Diego as reversing. What I was saying is both of them have had bad experiences since they did open entry. The American cities that reversed field, most of those had gone, that tried the experiment, did so in the 1980s. And their experience was so bad that they ended up going back to public convenience or necessity systems or something similar to that. This has been, was heavily documented in transportation studies. I'd be happy to give you a copy of one of those, Mr. Dunbar.
Sure.
No, what I was referring to most recently was cities which are now, once again, experimenting. Well, they've changed their laws to allow for open entry, and the results they're experiencing.
So I'm really interested. So what happened in the 80s, you know, I think could be instructive, but there's been a huge change in a lot of industries, including this industry with the advent of apps and that kind of thing since the 80s. So what I'd love to see, if you have evidence of it, is cities that have reversed field and rejected open entry in the last 10 years. If you can find a city like that, I would really, really appreciate that case study.
Well, actually, there's not that many cities recently that have gone to open entry because of the bad experience in the past. So those two that identified that they haven't reversed field, but maybe they ought to because they're having bad experiences with it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Croft, sir?
So, Mr. Brennan, I mean, there's a 3-minute limit because of convenience around here.
Understood.
I know you've been on this issue a long time. I just wanted to allow you to finish your point on Uber that you're about to make.
All right. And aside from that, what I'd like to do is give you all a handout because I'm not going to have time, if that's permissible.
Fine.
All right. Well, Uber, you know, one of the big concerns, which was raised, the question addressed to Mr. Gates by Mr. Flynn, there's one problem with removing all limits on the number of permits is that you have the loss of value, which should be immediate to the value of the permits, which creates the issue of whether the government this government would have to compensate those permit owners for the loss of their permit values. That was an issue with the Uber, the Uber interest in coming to town. That was one of the impediments for Uber coming to town. I know that there was an opinion, I think it was a 50-odd page opinion from the prior city attorney that addressed that. I have not seen the opinion, but I know that on the heels of that, the assembly did not go forward. There is at a minimum a substantial risk that if Uber were to come in playing under different rules, destroying the taxi cab industry, that there would have to be compensation paid by the municipality for allowing them to do so under different rules. So, to get to your question, Mr. Croft, what is going on here, I personally see as an effort to devalue the permits through this open entry so that the permit values that are already destroyed, try to sugarcoat it by making a phased-in 5-year phase-in, but with ultimate open entry, so that at that point the taxi cab would, two things would happen. One, the permits would be devalued, so you wouldn't say Uber coming in is going to devalue the permits. And the second thing is, you would so decimate the taxi cab industry that it would be wide open for Uber. Now we would have open entry, unlimited number of taxi cab permits, plus Uber. A taxi cab driver, by the way, under that situation, is not going to be able to make a living. Part of the purpose of the public convenience and necessity system was to develop an economy whereby Anchorage business people who participate in the taxi cab industry can make ends meet. That's, that would be destroyed by an open entry. I'd like to address the Eagle River and bar break thing, but I don't want to go beyond Mr. Croft's question.
Then what's the approximate market value of the transferable, the 158 transferable? Because the non-transferable don't really have a market value.
That's correct.
So what is the approximate individual market value of those transferable?
I'm not totally on top of that, but I think it's in excess of $130,000. So you have people who have invested in, this is the only way you can get into the taxi cab industry under a system, create a market system created by the municipality of Anchorage. And so people invested in reliance on that system. In some cases, they saved up their taxi cab earnings in order to buy such a permit. And now they would have the rug pulled out from under them and their savings destroyed.
Mr. Walton, third question.
So is this a time to kind of explore this idea of devaluing the permit? My opportunity.
Go ahead.
And I just look,
What we don't do in this, we don't modify the documents, but you're going to ask all the questions.
I just want to understand about that. It's an interesting thing. I grew up as an economist and run a small business, so to me, it's wide open. There's a wide open world, and other common shops that open right next to me, and I just have to live with it. And if the city said, we don't limit the number of common shops in this town, I go, hallelujah, great, thank you. And if they stop sometime later, I go, well, it was nice while it lasted, the whole thing, and move on. But you're saying that your industry is different.
Yes, not all industries, not all markets is it advisable to set up a system. Here there are reasons which I've just identified. Just to elaborate on that further, you have to have a system that has few enough permits such that everybody can make a decent living on it. But you have to have enough of them so that it'll provide the service where you need it. And there are times where there are problems when snow is falling and everybody needs a taxi cab at once. For example, so it's a carefully balanced thing, and this is what you have a transportation commission for, to decide how many you need. But when you do, to get your question, when you do create such a system, and you don't do what they did with the Alaska Limited Entry System for fisheries, which also set up a system, and in that one they specifically said when they set it up, this is not creating a property interest, and we can change it anytime we want without paying compensation. That wasn't done in Anchorage, so people have relied on that system. In answer to the question, well, when people buy a permit, don't they think that the government might sometime change the system? The answer to that is yes. But if the government does that, they're bound by the Alaska Constitution, which requires that when you do change a statute, change a city code in such a way that it destroys recognizable property values, then the government has to pay compensation. It's part of the fairness of our system. It's a check against a government saying, we're going to create this system by which the only way you can participate in this business, we didn't invent this system, the municipality did. The only way you can participate is to buy one of these permits And then out of the blue, lo and behold, they'll say, sorry, we're changing the system. Now anybody can get a permit, or will be able to do so on a phased basis. And so your permits are worth zero. Sorry about that.
Any other questions, Mr. Weidman?
No, I appreciate it.
Questions from assembly members? Thank you, sir.
I actually have a comment.
Mr. Peterson, and before you start, Mr. Gates, would you get the assembly a copy of Mr. Wheeler's opinion at that time period on Uber? You were involved in that. Dean Wheeler gave us an opinion. I'd like to see that opinion again.
Well, I have a copy here in front of me. It's a confidential opinion, and as I recall, Mr. Wheeler still really joined an executive session and collected it.
Okay, would you find
I would
out then
have
if
to
it's
discuss with-
public or not?
It's not public at this time. I would have to discuss this with Mr. Fossey.
Okay.
Which one? I could say though that it's probably has disagreement on some points with what Mr. Brennan said.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Peterson, go ahead, sir.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've actually had an experience with an open taxi cab situation when I was a Peace Corps volunteer. The city of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic had tried to have a totally open system. Anyone who could, afford to buy a car and get a driver's license and have the car painted and whatever could be a taxi cab driver. And they eventually got to the point where there were so many that they went to a situation where if your license plate number was odd, you could only drive on odd numbered days of the month, and if you had an even numbered cab, you could only drive on even numbered days. And I'll have to admit, as a consumer, it worked out really, really well because you could get around to long distances around the city for $1 because it was so competitive. I'm not suggesting that that's a great idea. I just wanted to bring that piece of personal experience out so everyone could know that those type of things have happened in the past.
Mr. Evans, sir.
If Mr. Peterson's on, I was going to ask Mr. Brennan to finish his comments on Eagle River that he said he had.
Oh, thanks, Laura. So those are two issues that have been specifically identified by Mr. Evans and others as a problem in Anchorage, and heard a lot of complaints from the community of Eagle River. I personally attended 2 hearings on that. And then bar break is another specifically identified issue, meaning that the early morning time when the bars are closing and all of a sudden everybody needs a taxi cab and there's not enough. And I have participated in a number of meetings of the subcommittee of this assembly. I think it was called the Public Safety Committee here a couple years ago to address that problem. On the Eagle River situation, the taxi cab industry wasn't convinced, and I don't think Mr. Musser was convinced, that there really is that much demand in Eagle River since people pretty much self-reliant on their own vehicles. However, it certainly needed to be addressed for those that needed taxi cabs. So what we at FOA proposed, and this assembly adopted an ordinance to issue some new special Eagle River area, it wasn't just Eagle River areas, North Anchorage, permits that would be auctioned by the city and then operated by the people that purchased the permits. Those were issued. The people that purchased the permits at auction found that there wasn't enough demand in Eagle River to make a go of it, to the extent that they returned their permits to the city, and the city did not turn around and go out to auction them off again. So one has to question how much demand there is up there. What we wanted to see was permits that were located in Eagle River, so that when there was a call, it wouldn't require an Anchorage driver to go all the way to Eagle River and possibly on a deadhead to find that somebody wasn't there. Anyway, that solution didn't work. There may be other solutions, but it's the idea of simply flooding out more permits we don't think is gonna address that problem, because you're still gonna have the same issue for each, do I wanna go all the way to Eagle River, and possibly be deadheaded? There's a lot of fuel involved for the driver in going up there. That's a special issue, but it's not one that's addressed with a hammer. Second one is the bar break issue. POA proposed, I think, 2 or 3 alternative solutions on that one. One of which was to allow the driver to charge a higher meter rate during that time, so as to use the market system to just give incentive to more drivers to go out on the road and to pick up those fares, which are sometimes not the most comfortable fares to pick up for reasons that you can imagine. That our proposals, all of our proposals on that didn't go anywhere. They didn't get as far as the Assembly working on an ordinance to adopt those. But again, we think a specific solution crafted within the confines of your existing system, which has otherwise worked for 40 years, is better than throwing out the baby with the bathwater and just flooding the market with permits.
Anything else, sir? Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Let's see who else wants to speak. We've got time. Just come forward, identify yourself by name. We've got time.
Good afternoon, I'm Susie Smith, and I'm a permit owner and operator. First of all, I think that the idea of just putting out 116 more permits is quite reckless, without any real substantial evidence for that need. I haven't seen this 2016 PowerPoint packet. I'm eager to look at it, because what I heard during the presentation from Evan just now is that the goal is to have owner-operators. Well, my experience in this industry is that owner-operators tend to operate their vehicles for their 8 to 10 hours a day, and then they go home. And typically, they work those shifts that are less threatening. They're a little more easy. They're the business owners. They're the guys going to the airport during the day. They're not the drivers that are out there at bar break. Okay? So when I looked at the analysis on that in 2013, when it showed a drop-off of vehicles on the road, typically those were owner-operators. Okay? So I think that's a major flaw in this proposal. I run a fleet of 33 cars. I only make money by leasing out those shifts, a day shift and a night shift. So my goal is to have somebody 24 hours a day. Now, there may be 22 hours a day, but I'm going to guarantee you it's pretty close to that on all 33 of my cars. If I were an owner-operator and I'm looking at, well, I could give that lease to somebody for $70 or $80 at night, and take the risk of them wrecking it or something happening at night, I'll just keep it at home. I don't have that extra liability, that threat. So I think that idea is not good for our city if that's the goal, to be there more available. The other thing is in our financial situation and the crisis of this city and this state, why the Assembly would give up a financial incentive? What's the incentive for the city to give up the auctioning system? Currently, you put those cars out for bid, 30 have been sold. It's generated somewhere over $2 million for the city. It went just to general fund. There was no special, it didn't go to the city, it didn't go to the transportation committee's office, because that's separate. That $1980, those fees cover the expenses of that department. So that over $2 million that were generated by sales or permits, why would the Assembly get rid of that? The other thing is to deal with wheelchair accessibility. That I've been in this business long enough to I've heard this over and over. Okay, we put out 30, however many taxis it has been, and only a very small number of those have been handicapped. I don't see why they haven't all been handicap accessible. A handicap accessible vehicle can still operate as a taxi cab. I mean, it still operates the same. It picks up anybody. But I think in the past, in the past it's been a financial situation.
Specific questions, Mr. Croft?
Just real quick, Susan, on the numbers, did I hear right that 94 we started adding the non-transplant, we've added 30, of which 25 were added after 2007, so only 5 were issued from 94 to 2007?
Correct.
Why isn't that an indication in 13 years, only 5 new permits, that there's something wrong in the system? Because the population growth at that time was significant. Whether we flattened off now or not, 94 to 2007, I'd have to think we went up by 20%.
You know, Mr. Ruff, I think our industry recognizes we have not been there saying there's not a need for more here and there, but I think the need and necessity that we have in place now actually analyzes that data in depth to give those numbers. But just to say that over the next 5 years, 116 more to be added, I think is reckless.
Thank you.
Other questions from Assembly members? Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Wait, I'm sorry, Mr. Trainee, I have a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
I'm sorry, I'm not there. Was it Susie Smith? I'm sorry, I have trouble hearing over this connection.
That's correct.
So, ma'am, you had talked about giving up the auction system, and you'd said that the last time we auctioned these off, it raised $2 million. Is that right?
Over the course of several auctions, it's generated that much, sir.
Right, and so you're questioning why we would sort of give that up and you know, go immediately to the $1,980. So under this plan, this 5-year phase-in, and you own 33 of these permits, so I think you probably have a good idea of sort of what the going rate is for one of these things. If we phased in over these 5 years, how much? What do you think the average auction price would be in year 1, for example, or year 2? You know, what kind of auction prices are we talking about here?
If you guys were to do it in the spectrum that you're proposing of 20 to 30 a year for the next 5 years,
Yes.
very little. Very little.
So, but then you just said that we'd be giving up $2 million, or it was $2 million if we did an auction the way we did the auction before. So you don't think the auction system would actually work under this bill? You don't think an auction here would raise any more money than what Mr. Evans has proposed?
I don't, because you're going to after 5 years, you're opening up to anybody. So no, I don't think you're not going to get very much volume for a 5-year usage.
Is that all, Mr. Dunbar?
I'd just like to I'd like to come back at the end and just talk about that briefly, but I don't need to ask her about it. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Whittleton?
Do people get loans to buy these permits?
Typically not banks loaning on them. Normally it's in-house kind of financing.
Is that common to have some kind of?
There are, like if, a lot of times people will do some sort of lending on their, like if I were to sell one and made a deal with somebody on a term.
You would finance, I want to finance it.
That's what.
Thank you, ma'am. And Bill's like to speak to us for a few minutes.
Very good.
Good to see you again.
Yes.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. Mark Marion, M-A-R-I-O-N is the last name. And what I can tell you is this ordinance has been necessary in this industry for the past 20 years. And I've been involved in this industry since 2004 as a dispatcher. And I can tell you that we do not have enough cabs in this city. And the thing about it is there is no such thing as a pie. ATPOA is a special interest group that pays politicians to go their way and to lie to the Anchorage public. That's what ATPOA does. Now, as far as the Eagle River situation is concerned, we could take care of that by allowing out-of-district cabs to service it. And I think Ms. Dabowski and I have talked to that many times in the past, private conversation. As far as the Medicaid voucher situation, taxicab should be taking that business away anyway. Because there have been fraud situations with operators taking Medicaid money and not using it for the purposes they're using it for. Now, I can tell you as a dispatcher, We definitely need more cabs out there. We also need more cab companies. So, but we also need to eliminate subscription to a dispatch. If we eliminate that, that allows for competition. You put more cars out there, you get competition, you get a healthy industry. Right now, the industry is unhealthy at the moment. You get what's called something to do with it's unhealthy, and you end up with low quality of service. When Uber was in town, the taxi cab industry improved during that time. And the reason it improved during that time was they had competition. Okay. Had Uber been allowed to completely continue, the dispatch companies didn't like the fact that they would have to pay their call takers more because they would have had a staff up here, they would have had people up here answering the phones. If there was a hard road to pronounce, like they do in Yakima, for instance. And I can tell you, we definitely need, and by the way, the price of the permit should only be $1,980, which is what you pay every 2 years for a renewal. This little thing of $130,000 for a permit, unless you can provide that you paid property tax on your permits, you don't have a value on them. There is no value on your permits.
Is that all, sir?
That is all. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Wilson, sir.
So you just work for a dispatch company?
Yes, I worked for a dispatch company for 7 years, and I could tell you we've had problems, especially in the handicap area, where we've had problems with. I used to force drivers to pick up these handicap trips, and until I'll say this like I said back in 2013, until 2009. You could not schedule a handicap trip because you didn't know when one was available. And I think the chart question hasn't been answered, but taxi cab companies stopped taking chart trips with the exception of Anchor Checker Cab since 2009.
So what kind of trip?
This is where where one taxi cab driver would drive a cab, and then the customer would go into the car. Is how it would go. And the way it would work is it would be like $25 or something like that.
You're saying the chart, Cabaret Hotel?
Yes, yes. It was mostly downtown bars, but other bars around town did participate because I used to have a list of all the bars that did participate.
Mr. Wilson, any other questions?
No, that's good, thank you.
Anything else from assembly members? Thank you, sir. Does anybody else wish to talk about assembly? Come on, sir.
My name's Dave O'Malley. Okay, I just want to, well, first of all, comment what Mr. Britton said about the Anchorage Transportation Commission. I've been monitoring now for about 8 years, and to me, it's worthless. And the reason why they get in favor of it is they know nothing will come out of it. I also want to say, if you want to get feedback from the community, your constituents, whatever, look at the articles being written either about the taxi industry in the newspapers or Uber, and just scroll down. People trash the taxi industry. They call it monopolies, cartels. To me, I call it an extortion racket. The attitude is take it or leave it. You don't like it, too bad. If you want to get a permit, pay our price. You want to improve service by adding permits? No way. Yellow cab, check cab dispatch, want to grow, expand? No way. You want to start service in Eagle River? It's against the law. It's ridiculous. What's lacking is competition, and once the customer base realizes when they call the cab company, somebody's going to answer the phone and they'll get a cab, business will dramatically increase. It will increase with the increase in permits. That's what's lacking. And basically, I commented a lot. You can get a loan for a permit. That's no problem. You just have to correct like anything else. And we just need more permits to improve service. The industry really is not servicing the public. It's not servicing the municipality. and it's about time, and there isn't a market value on the permits. The value on the permits is regulated right here at the assembly. More permits, price goes down. No permits, price goes up. And like I said, it's basically an extortion racket. And if you add the money in the last 6 to 8 years, permit owners have been paying for their attorney, Drew Rennie, for Ivan Moore's, public relations firm, Dan Coffey's public relations firm, and now Frank Bigfoot's lobbying. You're looking at, and plus all the contributions, political contributions, you're looking at well over $1 million to keep it that way. It's not benefiting the municipality, it's definitely not benefiting the public, it's not benefiting the drivers or the industry. So basically, I'm 100% in favor of Sunnyman Evans' ordinance. And it also I worked with Simply Woman Oceander back then. She thoroughly researched the whole topic about permits. Researched before that by, I can't think of the lawyer's name, but the 07 election. And now, Sunnyman Evans, also an attorney, also researched it. The municipality is not going to be responsible for the value of the permits.
Time's up. Thank you, sir. Questions from assembly members? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to discuss this with us for a few minutes? Anyone all? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, may I take my hand out?
Give it to the clerk right behind you. She'll make distribution to the assembly members. There. Forrest, did you want to say something, sir? We're at the
No,
end
I
of the
think,
meeting,
well,
then we'll have LB say one final comment.
I'm sorry, are we going to have another hearing on this before, I remember we pushed the date out on the public hearing pretty far. Are we planning to have another hearing on this?
Go ahead, Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunbar, I have some comments that I'm going to make at the end of this meeting, but Mr. Traney is the chair of the Rules Committee, and if he decides, and we will have another Rules Committee meeting before the public hearing. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No problem.
I don't know yet what our chair's going to say, but it seems like at some point, at least for the new members, an executive session where Mr. Gates can tell us some of the things.
What Mr. Weaver said in his, yes, we need to.
Or just some things that you wouldn't necessarily want public because of litigation and other reasons.
That was reason for us, so we'll do that again. We'll set it up.
Thank you.
Other comments, Mr. Weaver? Your final comment, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a moment to thank everybody for being here, but I also want to thank all my colleagues for being here, because this is a committee of the whole, and it just really helps when everybody's in attendance, so I really appreciate that. The Rules Committee has been in existence for a little over a year, and I want to thank Mr. Evans for giving me some language to expand on the mission statement, because it's really, really helpful. This is a really good process. It saves us a lot of time when we're at the assembly meeting and we're on the floor and people are watching us at home and in the audience. This process saves us a lot of time. So I'm going to suggest that we have, number one, an executive session, and number two, Mr. Chairman, I suggest that we have another Rules Committee meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. This meeting is over. Thanks for being here.